Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's good to see you again. It's great to be here together.
Thank you very much for joining us again. And I again would like to start with a moment of making time to come together here and to appreciate this shared space that we are having here. And the reason why I'm doing that, and I'm doing that ongoingly most of in our meetings, because it always, as we mentioned yesterday, it takes intention, awareness to leave one's private space behind and to dive into the sharedness of this online space that we have through technology, through Zoom, through us being here.
And what we were working at yesterday was, in some ways, to build a muscle of awareness that we don't use very often, because what we're pointing to is something that is always present, and yet our awareness is usually focused on something else. It's usually focused on what's happening between us, what's going on within us, but not the fabric of connectivity that actually we always share. So we started with one-on-one, because that's the easiest. We're familiar and comfortable, more or less, with being connected with one person. That's we can manage that usually fairly easily. Then we met in small groups, and it opened more our capacity to hold this awareness. And now we want to focus on the whole space that we're in together here virtually, really virtually.
And the foundation for successful facilitation of this work, to our understanding, is to be able to evoke this space in our awareness. There's a tipping point in any kind of coming together where this is unfolding a form of magnetism, where we are together, where this togetherness has its own power between us, where we are not what I just did 5 minutes ago, what I urgently have to do in 1 hour, my kind of thoughts, how I think all about this, all this can be part of it, but if it's not part of it in a way that it dominates it, but if it's part in a way that it is part of a shared space, then the space opens up to coherence.
And for those of you who have a meditation practice, you know how you can that you can be in meditation with thoughts and so forth going on, but they are in the background somewhere. But in the forefront is the space, is the openness, is the whole field of being. And that's very similar to what we're asking you to develop an awareness of here.
And in some way it's related to what many of you probably know through meditation experience, to kind of let go of all what is occupying us and be present. But it's different because first, we really do this together. And second, we do this by using language and interacting with each other. So there's a lot of distracting coming in. If I put an idea and you like the idea or you dislike the idea, you have responses. And immediately we are in this space of ideas, which is great to have, but it's different than the space of connection. And part of what is helpful to hold all this in connectedness. So what we tried yesterday to kind of start to work on is this muscle of awareness and attention, so that we as facilitators can hold this, can be aware of this, and then can invite to this. Because this seems to us to be a foundational skill in order to hold the space.
And speaking of that, the trajectory that we're on, and also the learning process with with facilitating and working with consciousness and this kind of connectivity in in a virtual space, in Zoom like this, is the first step is creating this kind of coherence, creating a coherence where we are resonating with, that we are aligned with a deeper, subtle dimension of our being connected. But that's just the first step, which is why we're the coherence and the sense of connectedness is the first step in this process, and it's the most important one, because without it you don't get to the next step, obviously. But that from there, um, where we want to go is, after coherence, we want to be able to engage with each other in a way that there's a new kind of creative momentum that is freed up. Out of this coherence comes momentum, and comes a creative connectivity that is in many ways the point of this work, that it allows for a kind of co-intelligence, a capacity to work together in a way that is quite fresh and quite inspired. So that's where we would like to try to move to today. And so we want to start uh, by your going into small groups. And again, it's that immediate intimacy. I think that Susanna spoke about yesterday, that the kind of the immediate intimacy of all of a sudden where we are with 5 other people, and to share what happened yesterday, to talk about the experience, of what happened yesterday, but work to not talk about it as an object, but to be from it when you speak, if you can understand that difference. So shall we?
Yes, we will have groups of something like 4 or 5 people. We thought to have these groups for something like 10 minutes. And there will be also some people who maybe haven't been here yesterday. So maybe this is also a good form to just let them a little know what your experience of yesterday was. And the idea is to just recap your experience of yesterday, your insights of yesterday, so that we are kind of coming from our yesterday learning experience to share this together then in the big group, and then make the next steps, as Elizabeth suggested. So again, I will open the breakout rooms. You will have a little pop-up window where you can say, yes, I want to join this. And you will be miraculous put together with 4 or 5 other people, and enjoy the conversation, and we see each other in 10 minutes.
People still talking, getting the last thing in, making sure that they can say everything they want to say.
Now everyone is coming back.
Here we go. Boom. Okay. Is there anything you'd like to share with us?
You can raise your hand, or
Or
do it also on screen. But as you have many screens, but we will see when you raise your hand. Angela, you want to unmute yourself? You're still muted. I can unmute you from my side. Now I can hear you. Yes.
Yeah, a small thing is I notice a big difference between talking about and talking from the space.
Thank you for mentioning that. That's in fact a big one.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's something that keeps one on the edge of the unknown also, because one can never be 100% sure where one is speaking from, particularly when one responds very quickly, or there's something that really is agitating or exciting, or it's am I with this space, or am I coming from a mental or emotional kind of space that is actually separate? Am I opening my interior to the space, or am I coming at it? And over time, one can even feel that there's something quite aggressive in the not being with the space. But it's a very important distinction, and it's one that one needs to work with practice.
And Ellen, you raise your hand. If you want to
Helen?
If you want to unmute yourself. Or I can help you to unmute.
I think, I don't think I can do it.
Yes, you are muted now.
Yeah. No, it was just to say that last night I came across an article in National Geographic about how exhausting it is for us as human beings to try and interpret or know people through Zoom, or how exhausting it is for our brains. That without the usual being able to interpret even expressions or body language or hand gestures, that our brains have to work so hard to try and get to know people. And I have the reference. I can send it to you if you like. And on the other side of it, actually, how people with autism actually like Zoom very much, because they find it maybe a lot less confronting than having to try and interpret signals all the time that they just can't do. I'm just wondering what your thoughts might be on that.
I mean, one of the things that they say about autism is that it is a hypersensitivity to stimuli.
Yeah.
So that hypersensitivity is there are certain channels of communication and information experience that are cut off in Zoom, and that brings to the fore. And I think I'd be curious to know if people felt exhausted after the session yesterday, or if it was something different.
Yeah, well, personally, I didn't feel tired after yesterday. I didn't stay to chat as we were invited to, because I felt sort of 2.5 hours was enough. I really didn't want to do any more yesterday, so that was enough. But I think it is interesting that it can be very, very tiring.
Yeah.
I think it is particularly tiring when one is not connected. But that's why this capacity to connect in this subtle dimension, I think, is so important for deeper communication and even our health in this context.
That's why we see it such an important task to facilitate it, to help to connect. Because the article you're quoting, there's several or many voices in this direction. I agree and disagree at the same time.
Okay. Yep.
And I would compare it to what I talked about yesterday about learning to drive a car.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
very nerve-wracking to learn to drive a car.
Exhausting.
It's very exhausting
Yes.
because
Yeah.
it's
No, I
completely,
agree with you totally. Yeah.
it's an overwhelm, and people, some people never get over it and just hate driving a car. Or also, if you connect with learning an instrument, learning to play the piano, I mean, it's nerve-wracking to learn to play the piano. It's completely, your nervous system can't cope with it. But as soon as you reach a form of mastery of that,
yes,
something else kicks in. So part of what I would suggest, and that's the part where I disagree, this is not just a given that is nerve-wracking. It has to do with our not having mastered this yet. And it's also because this is a new instrument. The car got just invented. We all have to learn to drive the car. Nobody knows how to drive the car yet.
This car.
We are 1905 right now in something like Zoom. And we are just figuring out what this means. But I would suggest, and people who are in this for a while, I think can indicate that there are forms of mastery. And then there are new ways to figure out how to interpret each other and to connect. And part what we try to share here is our findings, how to do this. And then our experience is that it becomes much less nerve-wracking to do this, and the connection and the flow comes in the foreground.
Yeah, it becomes enlivening rather than simply exhausting. And that's quite, I think that's quite a difference, quite a difference. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you.
Kin, do you want to say something? You want to do a comment? Do we have everybody on mute without being able to unmute?
Maybe so, and I unmute you all for a moment and mute you again. And then with the capacity that you unmute yourself.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, just to answer your question, Elizabeth, I actually felt more energized after yesterday's session. For work, I'm on Zoom every day. So I have 1 or 2 sessions and I actually get exhausted.
Yeah.
And I can only say that, after yesterday's session, it was just more alive and more energized.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, because just to use Ellen's example, if basically we all get on the road with a car and nobody knows how to drive a car, that's quite exhausting experience.
It's terrifying.
But if we start to learn how to drive a car and how to do this together, at least when we are not in completely crowded cities where it's nerve-wracking anyway. So maybe the example with the car is not the best one, but to play the piano is a better example.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I started learning both, playing piano and learning to drive.
Yeah.
And in our small group session, someone said something which was very important, I felt, that technology is part of us, but what changed then was when it became the background and the foreground was more interesting of being together and actually being able to be distinct and as collective, because we become very distinct in this little square, more than anything else before. And also the technology where we can get very addicted to, like all the bells and whistles. We start actually focusing then on what was needed, what was more important. So in that way, that kind of a simple awareness was less tiring. That's the word. Like I would find, for example, even looking at group chat message right now, that was distracting for me because I just want to be in the space to talk. And so it helps actually, the guidelines that had been set, it actually freed up energy to be aware of what was more important, which was actually in this collective space and then distinctly each person also.
Yeah.
It actually is a perfect, what you're saying is kind of a perfect representation or metaphor for what we call the higher we, or the emergent we, that we have we are each our individual self. It's not about lessening who we are as individuals, but we're empowered by and connected to a whole that allows us to, in many ways, think in new ways, think and be and create in new ways together. So it's there's a pattern. It's like we're like a quilt on screen of these beautiful different faces, and we're also a whole here, and that is the in some ways what we would call the developmental step that we see as so important right now, that we are able to take to prize our individuation, our capacity for our own creativity, our own understanding of our interiority, and at the same time we're able to put our agendas to the background and our self-concerns to the background and be fully together, be deeply together, and learn how to create from this place.
And to use the terminology of Otto Scharmer, to our understanding, this is connected to presencing. That we develop the capacity, and in an online setting, this is even more needed as a skill to be present to the emerging moment right now and not be distracted by it. Because only that, if we together are in this emerging moment of a dialogical situation and pay attention to its own life force, we can hold coherence in that. But everything and anything can be distracting our mind, or as you mentioned, Kin, the chat function. Sometimes as a moderator, I stop the chat function. Because I have a two-sided relationship to it. On one hand, I like it because it allows a more multidimensional flow, but sometimes it just it overvoices the main conversation that's going on. It's an ongoing kind of distracting. Where should I put my attention? And it breaks the flow ongoingly, particularly if people are kind of bringing their self-importance in the conversation and are not kind of attentive and careful for what is going on and what we are creating together. If somebody is just somewhere else and just wants to be heard and seen and just bombs the conversation with something, it can be quite harmful to conversation. So a lot, like in natural life, there are a lot of social skills that we have to learn, and we haven't learned them yet. There is in a positive form, there's an etiquette that we have to develop together, how an online conversation can flower. And some people are just, unfortunately, the people who are least aware of it are also just are not in the position to learn what is harmful, because they're not aware of what is harmful. So they just continue doing what is doing, and to invite them, because you also don't want to be confrontative with it. You want to invite people. That's a skill, because on one hand, you don't want kind of this is allowed, this is not allowed. You want an open, co-creative atmosphere where we do this together and we are not to set rules. This is allowed, this is forbidden. But on the other hand, you also want to protect the space. So you have to do two things at the same time: to honor the openness and to honor the space and to protect it. And this is part of the skill that you have to learn as a facilitator, how to do this.
I'd say also if you're working with a group over time, that is a group that you're cultivating, that you're part of, that you're facilitating, cultivating people's love for this space, this connectivity, this aliveness between us, this wholeness. It's not something that one has to demand. It demands it of us in a certain way. That in this connection, there's a a response that we have that is one of care, of interest, of a recognition that there's something here that is precious, and in that that can help you develop the norms of your group. What will the etiquette, as Thomas was saying, be for the group that you're working with? And for some, it may be we don't want to use chat, for example, or we don't want to use hand raising. We just want to be able to respond when we want to respond. But it's all focused in one. It's not all focused on this. So I misspoke. But it has as a foundation a real care for the truth of and the potential of this connectedness.
And we do have some more raised hands, and I would like to ask Marcus to unmute yourself. And
thank you. I had a reflection on what you were talking about, this, especially the silence. And I've been in meetings where so many people are sitting, and just to calling upon the silence usually results in it is silent and nobody dares to speak. So I wanted to thank you for the way you arranged this yesterday, and you created the space where I think it should start with two people each other just watching, and then you build on the driving lessons and building a small larger group. And I think this experience made it possible to really sense the possibility of silence, and also daring to speak when we get back into this large group. So from a facilitation point, that was very insightful and a very nice experience. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Marcus. That's a learning experience for us also, because as the groups become bigger, the challenge becomes bigger. And to just honor the overwhelm, particularly if people are new to this kind of technology, and all of a sudden you are together with 50 or more people on screen, you don't see them. It's completely kind of overwhelm. What how should I relate to that? And the natural result is to close down. And if everyone just pulls back and closes down, that's the least helpful situation that you can create. And to use just the simple fact that it's easier to connect one-on-one. And to learn, like the comparison with the driving lessons, to learn driving one-on-one, and see, hey, Marcus, I can relate to you on screen. There are things that I know from human relationships that also work here. Although I just see you on screen, but I see your smile, and the smile reaches me, and there are things I can learn how we can create a contact, and to be kind of more kind of slowly find my way in, how I don't connect to the computer right now, but connect to you, Marcus, right now. And give each other time to do that. I mean, it depends on the setting. If you have a work schedule, so you can go through all of that. You just have to make compromises in this. But as much as you can to help people to feel also comfortable in this environment, because you also don't want an anti-reaction. If people just hate to be in there, most likely the meeting won't go so well. But if people just enjoy each other's company in a very different situation.
Sure. I'd like to pick up on something that you said, Marcus, about the silence bringing people together. And part of what we're doing right now is we are creating coherence in the whole group. Most of you, some of you are new, most of you shared an experience from yesterday. We're calling your attention to the whole that is made up of these wonderful individuals, but the fact that entering into this space from wherever you were before we started opens you to a different a different potentiality, a different dimension. We're looking at, we're trying to create coherence, and from that coherence that there's a felt sense at a subtle level of connectedness, of it's not a connectedness that one makes, it's not a relationship, it's an already relatedness that becomes revealed. And silence is a very good way to do that. Even in a whole group, even in a group like this, a moment of silence, meditation. There are different ways that one can work with opening exercises that allow us to touch into something primary that we share. So silence is one of those. Meditation, depending on the context of your group, for 5-10 minutes can be another way of kind of bringing people together. Toning can be a way of bringing people together, that in a coherent field. Sometimes in a more lighthearted way, singing together. We were part of a conference last weekend where
we did collective singing improvised on Zoom. And believe it or don't, it worked.
No, well, but it was.
I have to admit, you don't do this in any kind of context.
Every context.
In every kind of context, there are many contexts you maybe wouldn't like to do that. But if you have some, if there's some liberty and some fun to do this together, it can be just very heart-lightening just to share, to kind of start to improvise with each other and sing with each other.
Well, we were all muted and we all sang. We were asked to sing a song that we liked, that we loved, and then at a certain point we were unmuted, all singing different songs. and in that chaos, something started to kind of work together, which was a lot of fun.
In fact, and that's interesting, in this chaos, coherence started to self-organize itself. We started to relate to each other, and out of chaos, coherence came just because people related to each other, which in itself is a very interesting experience.
Yeah.
But you have to be in a kind of experimental situation to allow yourself to do this.
Yeah, I mean, these are suggestions for different contexts that you might be facilitating. Okay, Susanna.
One last hand up, which is Susanna. Susanna, please.
What stuck with me from yesterday was when you said to realize that we are, even it's an online space, we are here physically as physical persons. And I'm a professional circle worker, and normally when I work with a group in a physical room, one part of my preparation before the group is arriving is that I walk around the chair circle when it's empty. So it's kind of, for me, it's preparing or creating this circle before they arrive. And I try, when I work with groups in online space, I try to transform little rituals I do normally in physical space to the online space. And for example, when I work with groups or circles in online space, I create this circle ritual for myself. I imagine it before I start working. So that is one possibility which helps me to create this physical and this coherence feeling, so that the circle becomes as much physical as possible.
And I'm just curious, Susanne, if your experience is also similar that the physicality or the physical experiences has also a different new dimension to it, because we are not at the same spot physically. That physicality all of a sudden, when you lean into it, and I see you, you see me, and we see the others, and we are in different places. All of the span of this physical space that's between us becomes part of my physical experience.
That's true.
Which is very interesting, because it changes my relationship to time and space, because all of a sudden I'm not just sitting here in this little office in Frankfurt, Niederösel. I'm also with all of you somehow connected, and there's a real-time relationship far beyond my physical reach, but I'm physically feel that. And it's something, I think, which is a new human experience, and it's of a different dimension that I find important to honor, because it allows us to be more aware of the cellular reality of our connection. That's more than just a mental reality when we speak to each other here.
And the earth-based,
Yes.
based reality that we're in. And I think this is, I feel this is a new capacity. We often, every year, and actually we did a special one for the beginning of the Corona crisis, we do a 24-hour meditation with meditation teachers and guides from all over the world, and we've also focused on the trouble spots in the world and that need prayer, that need meditation. We do, and we, at the end of it, there is such a deep felt sense of walking on this sphere, this enormous, and being in deep connection with different places. And people tell us that they experience that when they read the news after that, it's like, oh, I know this place. It's not, these are the others. It's like, oh, these are part of my family. This is part of what I'm connected to, what's happening in Africa, what's happening in the Philippines. And I think that it's interesting that this felt capacity is coming online at a point where we need a different kind of global togetherness.
To use shamanic language, you experience this as part of your relationships.
All my relations.
All my relations. And it has a direct experience, and it's of course different than in a tribal context, but there's something, it's all my relations, and it means that.
But let's actually, speaking about shamanic, and let's talk about language. And I think this goes back to what Angela said as the very first comment, the difference between speaking about and speaking from. And that is about using language in this space, because we are dealing with consciousness, that whatever I say has an impact on you at a subtle level. So it's language is an invocation in this space. It is what creates and defines the richness and fullness of the space, where we offer our words as invitation and as invocation. And I think this is a very important part of facilitating in an online context for depth.
And in order to work with this in a conscious way, it's important to just be aware that language always has two dimensions. One is the dimension that language talks about, and the other dimension is the language as an act. Language is doing something. What Elisabeth just mentioned as an invocation is a language act. to put it again in Germanic language, a language is in itself magic. And what I mean is not so, you don't even have to go esoteric with this. It's a very simple fact. If I voice the word tree, in all our consciousness, something like a tree emerges. It's a powerful instrument. When you say, I just use this word and say tree.
The sound.
The sound, the air, the sun, or coronavirus. Something emerges in the space. So I do something. Language is always evoking reality. And if you look historically, it's also that the birth of language, when we humans started to learn language, is identical to the time when we also started with magic. So that the first relationship to magic, to language before it became rational, where we kind of more are focused on the rational functions of language, where the evocational capacities of language.
Which is why in many early societies, in that saying your name meant something so powerful, that someone saying your name and calling you was an act of power, because it referred to you. Some societies have two names. There's the name that is your true name, and then there's the name that you're called, because the invocation of your true name has deep power and meaning. It demands your presence. If I say Angela, it demands all of our attention goes to Angela, and our gaze is directed at you. You are summoned. And that power of language here in this context is heightened. We miss this most of the time as we're chatting and going about our days. But in this space, and to facilitate this space with consciously, we need to be very aware of the power of language.
This is, of course, true in any kind of dialogical situation, because this is just how dialogical situations construct themselves. They create realities by voicing language. But as we mentioned yesterday, there's a particular quality to online spaces, because the space we meet in here is not held by physical reality. It's only held through technical support, through presence and language. So it's even more important to be very aware how we are holding this space through talking. And I'm sure you notice, not only in online meetings, but also in offline meetings, but particularly in online meetings, it can be even more powerful. If someone just talks his or her mind, basically, and is completely unaware of the situation, doesn't care if the others are interested, doesn't care what the effect it is. It's just because it's on my mind, I want to tell you. And how this mindless use of speech can destroy a relational field, because it can be an intrusion, it can be even violent, it can be disconnecting. And again, because the people doing this are the people who are least aware of it, it's also difficult to help them not to do that, because they are not aware of the damage they're creating in a space. So part of the skill to hold the space is, first of all, that's what we highlighted yesterday, to heighten one's own awareness of the space, so that we are very aware what the effect of different language in the space is. But then also to invite people to be aware of the space, to respect the space, and to see what language does. Because to the degree that a critical mass in the conversation is aware of the effect that language has in the space becomes a sensitive space. Mm. And when you reach that to a degree that there's a sensitive space, I mean, not just that you are aware of the space, but the group is aware of the space, or a big enough part of the group is aware of the space, a very different conversation is possible.
And that is also why we start with this connection and creating this connection and building the connection up from one-on-one to the whole, because it is, from what we see, a natural human response to the awareness of this deep interconnection and this presence between us, is to want to care for it. So that keeps one cultivating that awareness and that and the care that emerges from that awareness is an important part for creating a stability in a group, so that people don't want to come in and just say whatever they want to say in a certain way, so that or assert themselves in the space. Now we're talking about ideal. This is for contexts that are very intimate, contexts that where you're really cultivating something together, co-creating something together that is deeply important to all of you. Providing, I know some of you are providing ritual and ceremony for other human beings who are in distress. These kinds of contexts, this is very, very important. In more open dialogical contexts, one deals with more ups and downs and different perspectives that are coming from different motivations, and that takes a different kind of skill to work with.
Yeah. And there are many ways how to work this, and I'm very sure that you have your own ways that are different from ours and coming from your own skills. And I think it's also important that everyone finds his or her own way how to work this, dependent on your background, your skill, your capacities. The way we try to work this quite often works with something, to use a Buddhist language, what we call pointing out the instructions. And with the pointing out instructions, we mean making people aware that there are different ways how we can focus our attention. And one thing that we quite often bring into conversation is to point out that the conversation changes when I'm more interested in that what happens between us than what my ideas about something is. There's a quality of not knowing, and the interest point changes. What's happening in the conversation between us, not what I want to bring into this conversation, but that's good. That's part of it. It's all fine. But there's something that's building between us. Am I aware of this? And just to cultivate this attention, what's happening between us, allows us to be much more attentive to hold this and to cultivate this. And there are two ways that usually, and of course this is an oversimplification, but it helps to point it out, how we usually not aware of this space between us. One we call to be too intellectual, and the other is to be too personal. And what we mean with to be too intellectual is, and that's kind of danger of language, because language has, as you talk, always a hypnotizing quality. What you talk about is the space you dive into with your consciousness. The more you talk about it, the more you go into the space that language opens. So and that's again particularly true for intellectual men, when you are full of ideas and very poignant ideas and important ideas that are important, there is a tendency to forget about that you are in relationship right now. Your whole awareness becomes in this space of ideas that you are, and that in itself is no problem. But if you lose contact and you lose interest in the space in between us, you're just basically bringing your ideas, and they can be the most beautiful ideas, but they're disconnected because you're in your mind. And on the other hand, there's also a form of being too personal, and I start to tell you, about my personal something that happened with my aunt and my mother, and which is very important to me, but has nothing to do with the situation that we are in right now. It's not of service of this conversation. I pull you into my personal world and force you basically to join my personal world, not honoring that we are something together in right now. And these are just 2 pointers that allow to make us aware there is something between us that needs our attention.
Mm. And that just one more thought about that personal space, that oftentimes people want to be parts of groups so they can get attention, that they can get attention for something that they are working with or puzzled with about, or that they are that what they're looking for is for the attention on themselves. And that can be true of somebody who's being very intellectual or someone who's being very personal, but it is in many ways a me first perspective. And what we're talking about here, the underlying theme really is, how do you create emergence? So we are talking about the emergence of this space between us and the potentiality of that many of you are experiencing, that there's a potential that opens up when we recognize that there's a presence together. But then also, how do we, in speech, in language, in speaking together, create allow emergence to happen? And emergence doesn't happen when we are rooted and fixed in our established identity, stories, intellectual predispositions, and so forth. Emergence can only happen when there are cracks. And one crack is not knowing. Another crack is being more interested in what's happening between than what's going on in my head. And it doesn't mean that one can't bring oneself in fully, but one brings oneself in service to what is happening in the whole, rather than demanding that the whole be in service to oneself. And it's a very significant difference. But emergence comes from that emergence comes from the space in between, when that is honored. And I also want to say, we really aren't paying attention to the chat. So if you've asked questions there, we're not responding, it's not just that we're simply ignoring you. We are ignoring the chat, and we're ignoring the chat because we're trying to hold the space here with all of us. And it's quite a distraction to have to read it. We break our concentration. So if you're trying to communicate with us that way, it's better to raise your hand. Because
and in general, it's also, as we said before, good to be very careful with the chat, because it is kind of a parallel conversation that sometimes can be fruitful, but sometimes not. And just be very aware that you do something for all 75 people when you do a chat, and that you are you're co-creating the space with every chat that we are doing, and again, we have to learn how to do this, and it's a learning process. But just to be very aware that every single thing we do has an effect to the whole space of 75 that we are in right now.
Yeah, and actually, that's really important. You may say, I'm just one of these little squares, so I'm really not doing anything here. And Elizabeth and Thomas are the ones that are talking, but actually, your movement, your attention, your consciousness is creating this space. It's like we're not doing it. It's all of us that are doing it. So that it's really important to keep that in mind. I think we should move to our break now, and let's come back in 30 minutes. So that's 5 minutes. 5 minutes after the after the hour, I think in India, and 35. Whatever the hour is, 35.
India is always half an hour off the other time zones, so it's more complicated with India time than other times. And again, our recommendation: take a deep breath, maybe have a cup of tea, go out, have a look at the sky, connect with the 3D reality, connect with embodiment, nature, detox from technology, because coming back should be fun. It should be not a kind of too much computer space. We try to find a balance that can hold all of that and can be a nourishing human experience.
And also, because this brings alive this subtle presence, this subtle dimension of interconnectivity, bring that outside with you. It will make your experience of nature or whatever you're doing deeper, richer.
And maybe just to put a little item to this, when you go outside and maybe you go to nature, maybe be aware also this can be a dialogical experience.
Okay.
With that, have a great break and see you in half an hour. Seems people are slowly coming back. Oh, well, most of us are here, Ray.
But we have 2 minutes before we start.
I hope you got a break.
And some tea. I see Stephanie has tea or coffee. Yeah, Martina, yay. Yeah, actually, Thomas has a beautiful teacup.
Hi, Mario.
Yay. Good to see you, Mario.
Again, let's take some deep breaths. Let's arrive here again. Let's the shared space reassemble itself through our presence, through our attention. It's really it's coming together. As soon as we tune in, the space comes in again. And that's something that it's also good to give some moments in the beginning, so that when we move too fast in doing this, the space hasn't really come together, and then you start in a kind of a little fractured moment.
Also breathing, looking, being, but this not being so focused in the eyes, but focused in a deeper part of oneself, or deeper in oneself.
Right.
It's important. As we were saying yesterday, bringing in your whole being into the space, not just the part that looks and analyzes.
One thing that helps me always is to also let in when I'm on screen like you with camera. It's not just my front that comes in, my kind of face front, but I bring in my whole space, all this, my backward. It's even the place where I am, Frankfurt, Niederösel, somehow
Germany.
It's all in there. And just to be aware of that, it's not just the pixels of my front face that are here. It's this whole multidimensionality of my being here that's somehow connecting with you and seeing your backgrounds and where you're from, the connection becomes much richer when we don't connect to just flat screens and flat faces, but through the multidimensionality that everyone is in reality, because no one of us is a flat surface. So our presence that we are sharing is not the flat surface, and to be aware of that allows, at least it's my experience, it opens something in myself where I feel much more 3D, maybe even 4D being with you, and I experience you much more 3D or 4D, although my screen also only makes 2D.
It's funny, we were in a conversation recently with someone who was trying to counteract the 2D of the screen by trying to look in other places and be and try to be in a whole surround, but doing that and moving around like that made it very fragmented. It was very sweet. It was a very sincere intention to try to bring more dimensions into Zoom, but to just bring it in as oneself, as one's space, as one's culture, as an act in consciousness, allows us to be present to each other and not kind of like what the heck is that person doing, looking around and being around, moving in this way. Okay, so I guess we should be all back by now from the break, and if not, people will pop in. With that 30 minutes of time off and potential integration, because we gave there was a lot of input and a lot of input in about different things and in different ways. So we wanted that to settle with you, and wondering what questions you might have or comments you might have at this point.
And maybe also just to give some orientation, we would like to have some shared conversation around the input that we gave before here for the next, I don't know, many minutes. Then we also want to move again into a group setting where you can work in smaller groups. And then in the end, we want to come back, have a conversation about that. And then we would like to have the same ending like we did yesterday, so that we will end the big room, but you will get back into your small settings, and either you would, if you have to leave right away, but if you want to chat a little bit, you also can chat a little bit, so that you have a sense what our plan is, what's coming up.
Great. Okay. Helen, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Sometimes it's not easy to differentiate between personal agenda and what is serving a group.
It's also okay to have both, by the way. It's an ongoing learning process, how to combine it.
Yeah,
I completely understand.
I have deep gratitude for your teaching. You put in words what I was never able to put in words, but what I sensed in Zoom meetings. And so there came a lot of sadness up in the break now, because I'm in a project where I don't see how to give input in that direction, and it is fragmented and it is not what it wants to be. I see all the shadows. And yeah, I just wanted to give it in here, this big gap what I see between your teaching, which I think is wonderful. And what I experience in that project, and so far also my incapability of serving the project in this more business aware of it, there's where the sadness comes in.
That's a beautiful sadness, Helen. That's an aspiring, reaching for kind of sadness, which I deeply appreciate. I think that it takes practice, and also in each group it's different, particularly if it's not a group that you're running, even if it's one that you are responsible for as a facilitator. It going into this depth is something that people need to be willing to do, and you can't force people to be this kind of vulnerable in a at the level of presence together. It's as we often say, it's always an invitation, and there are people who won't go, and that is when one realizes what's possible and sees that that's the case. That can be very sad, but it's a sadness born out of a beautiful, a recognition that there is something beautiful that's possible that's not being realized.
There's also something in relationship to what you bring in, which I find an ongoing learning experience, and which also in our longer trainings is something that I experience as a quite common trap in doing this.
Mm.
Because when we have an experience of what is possible, the temptation is to bring that in a different situation. And on one hand, it seems that seems to be an okay thought. You see potential, you want to bring it in a different situation. But what the trap is in there, and that's sometimes a very hard learning experience, that every dialogical context has its own potential. And to bring something from a different context in the particular context means that because I want to bring that here, I'm missing what's really possible right now. And it sometimes just takes a lot of humility to be there or in service for what is the real potential of this situation right now, and not to reach for something that's maybe at this point out of reach.
Because you'll only get there step by step. And I think I can't tell you how important what Thomas just said is, and it is so hard, because when you have a sense of like, wow, we could have an explosive, or we could be in this field together, it'd be so amazing. Why is it not happening, and why do people not want to go there? But that to realize that ends up also being a part of what keeps it from happening. And to be able to be with the conversation in the moment and responding.
Because when you're still with the other situation that you would like to have, the trap is that you're not with the situation you're in. You're not available for the real potential because you want the other potential. It makes you less available for what is really possible. And maybe what is possible would be if you are available for this and not just try to bring the other in. That's the humility and the strength that's needed there. And it opens up your capacity to be of service for the particular dialogical situation that is the one that you are at the very moment.
And it allows you not to be so hard on yourself.
Also.
You know, like I didn't do it. I wasn't able to do it. This didn't happen. They didn't come with me. Something wrong with me. It's like, no, you can relax and be there and be curious about what is possible right there.
Thank you so much. This is very helpful to me, and I take your words in and the spirit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Akash.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Akash.
Hi. So one of the things that I was reflecting on after you shared in the previous session, so we were speaking about how do we create that space in the online platform, and while at the same time there would be some people, and then we were talking about language as well and the importance of it, and how can some people wanting for attention or speech can just talk in the space and maybe create that energy imbalance. So maybe if we want to facilitate on in online spaces, what can be that skill, or maybe some practices that we could do while holding sessions, where we could address to those aspects.
I think we will do an exercise a little bit later that I think you could possibly use. Also, because basically what you need to do is to with at least a core number of the people that you're working with, you need to develop the sensitivity to, when am I speaking from this space or in service to that which I am a part of, this whole, or when am I just talking because it's like I want to be heard. It's there's an agenda that I have that I want everybody to do this and not that, and we're not even allowing a co-creative space to happen. That at least with a core group of the people that you work with to develop capacities for listening, develop capacities for a sensitivity to the presence of the space itself. If you work with your core team, or you have enough strength in your core team to do that, you can hold it.
And there are many ways, I think, to go about this. And I'm sure on this call, there are many very experienced people who have their own skill set, how to address that. The way we do this, and it's particular our style, and that's why I stress it's just our style, is the main technique, if you want to call it this way, is to point out the space, to make aware that this space is real, that it can be sensed, and when it can be sensed and when it becomes a shared sense between us, it creates its own magnetism, its own attraction. So part of, and basically that's what we're doing right now and ongoingly, is to create awareness of the existence of this shared space between us, because as soon as there is a heightened awareness of that, the energy dynamics of a dialogical space online changes, because this becomes a reality that people can relate to. As long as people cannot relate to it, it cannot create energy. But as soon as people can relate to it, it can create energy. That's the main way we do this. But again, that's our style. I'm sure there are different styles how to go about this.
But also in terms of, I think what you said, people have to be able to relate to this. And if you have a group of people, some of whom are able to perceive it and some are not able to have a sense of this, the energetic quality, the opening that this space is, that becomes more difficult. You at least need a core group of people who can perceive that space, and then other people can perceive can perceive that when someone is taking over the space, you can become clear about certain things that are very, very obvious. Like if you're the only one that's talking, that's probably not a dialogue, or if we're not mindful that other human beings are present, are here, and they each have a perspective on what it is that we're working with or talking about, and we want to hear, we want to hear from them. Or I think also something that I think has been interesting, that to realize that the people who you don't know well or who you haven't heard from may be the ones that are holding the thing that you need to learn. And that kind of respect for each other in this context can be very, very helpful to develop a sense of, there's a sense of community that is based on friendship. And then there's a sense of deeper connectivity to presence. And you can work both together in order to reach this level of depth and the potential that opens up. Does that help?
Yeah, it does help. And thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thanks, Akash.
And there's one hand up, Sarah from the Netherlands. Sarah, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you.
Sarah.
I have a question on the importance you.
You're a little silent. If you can go closer to the microphone, maybe it's easier to hear you.
Is it better like this?
Little bit.
A little bit.
Just try.
Maybe if I try to adjust my volume a little bit, is this better?
Yes, it's getting better.
But there's clicking in the background.
Oh, yeah, okay, I'm sorry.
Great.
Yeah, I was wondering of the balance between, because I feel so much love and attentiveness from all the collective that's here trying to hold the space. And at the same time, it is also a process that needs time. And how does that relate to the very fast pace of the virtual space of to have gatherings like within an hour and a half? It feels like for me the metaphor of, if you want a stew that's tasty, you need time to let it burn, put it on the aga. And of course you can have like a soup from a package, you still get the taste, but it's not the real taste. Wondering how do you deal with that, the time frame? Thank you.
Okay. I think if you're talking about, it depends on every situation, right? If you're working with a group of people that you have an ongoing relationship with, you're a work team, you can start to build in some of these practices over time to be able to take the friendship and working relationship that you have to a level that's deeper. If it's just a spontaneous meeting of different people on a project that don't know each other for an hour, there are ways to adapt certain we have when we teach dialogue, we have certain kind of foundational approaches or that we work with. Some of them we're bringing them in here, like not knowing, and we're going to be talking about more of them, but to in a work meeting like this to put in space to say, okay, we're gonna sit in silence, we're gonna be here in silence for a minute just before we start. A minute you probably can use, and then to say, hey, let's have a meeting where instead of we each chip in, here's my thought, here's your thought, here's your thought, to see if we can create a thread so that what I say depends on what you say, Sarah. You say this, and it's like, oh, well, from my experience, I know something about that, but I would take it in this way. or to invite people to be more interested in what they don't already know. To listen with an attentiveness that is not based on, oh yeah, I know what you're saying. I know you, I know what you're saying. I've got that all figured out. Never mind. I don't really have to pay attention. But to encourage things like that, that can help lift these meetings into a more co-creative and collaborative context, even when they're fast.
I mean, again, a lot is dependent on context. And they're just meetings where there's so much time pressure on something and people are so scared or they feel so under that there's just not much possible. But one thing that I always find it's more there than we think is that people are aware of the overdrive that you're that you are kind of pointing to, if I may call it that way, this overdrive. And quite often, when there's enough, when there's not too much pressure that people don't respond to anymore, just to point out that it's possible to just slow down and have a breath in this. People appreciate that, and the tone and the language and the rhythm changes afterwards. And again, it's a form of skillful way, because if it's done by invitation, it comes different than if it comes like a command. And you are also it's dependent how responsive people are to each other in this. But when there's a responsiveness, quite often people respond to their own recognition. Maybe we don't need the overdrive. Maybe just a different breath, different rhythm allows us to maybe come to even deeper results of what we're doing right now.
Actually, I think it's a sweet thing that you said, Thomas, the difference between an invitation and a command. Because people often, when you start doing things like, okay, we're going to start every meeting with a gong, and then we're going to have, we're going to have 2 minutes of silence or 5 minutes of silence, and then we're going to move on with the meeting. It often over time builds resistance gets built, because it's like, okay, here we go again. And people don't feel included in that. But to say, but even to point to, like, wow, we're all so stressed right now. It's like, or our deadline is coming up. It's like, it feels, we feel like we're in a real jam, and here we are on Zoom. Maybe, what about taking a minute? Let's just take a minute and just like be here together. And then let's take a deep breath and start. There's a different, it's different than these things that people are often get irritated by over time. It's like, oh, here she comes with her thing again. So anyway, I think between that and again, it's your authentic style is going to be what works here.
Maybe one last hand up, which is Theodora Radulescu. Theodora, if you have unmuted yourself already. Great.
Go ahead,
Go ahead.
Hello, Elizabeth and Thomas.
Hello.
Okay.
Hi. I feel deeply touched, and I'm learning a lot, and also very inspired. And I felt, first of all, sharing that I'm realizing the collective intelligence is really working, because the questions that I had, other people are building up on. So thank you very much for that.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you all. That's all your work.
My question was that I find myself in the role usually of the person that brings these tools into the workspace where I am. I'm working with different NGOs based on sustainability and community building. And I would love to ask if you could speak more about embodiment. Because it clicked for me that when I embody these practices, it's something within me and my energy space that brings it to the team. And I am in this role of, oh, come on, here she goes again with her silence, and I've encountered a team member that whenever I bring this invitation, the answer is very resistant, like there's a strong no, and I feel I'm getting kicked out of my own grounding when I hear this strong no. How do you deal with that?
Okay, it's a deeper question. Again, I think there are many ways how to go about this, and again, I just would like to talk about our style, how to do this, and not say this is the way how to do this, but a particular approach. In fact, you named it already, because there are two factors to it. One is one's own groundedness. If you are grounded in your embodiment and in the foundation and in awareness and in the presence, you can bring this to any environment. And this, in the end, if I may call it so, it's a spiritual practice to hold this. It's a spiritual strength to hold this groundedness, the awareness, this presence. And the other quality that's as important is your capacity for relationship, to be with the others in this. And if the others are in a very different place, the challenge is to hold both places in yourself and be the bridge of both places, because that creates resonance with the groundedness and the other place, and see what can emerge in dialogue of these two spaces, not in confrontation, but in kind of a resonance that allows something to emerge as a potential between both of them. Because usually something quite creative can come out of that, but it needs your strength, but it needs also your capacity to be with the space you're in, with the people you're in, so that a synergy can rise out of that. And it's something easy to just say as I do, but it is, I find, a practice that on one hand is a personal practice of groundedness, and basically also not be blown away if here she comes with her and on the other hand, to also stay connected and stay in the resonance field, so that something can be worked together, which also means a listening capacity, because maybe there's also, not maybe, always, there's also something to learn from what comes from this, the rest of the space right now. And it's up to us to allow this to emerge to something that is of a new quality.
I think in some ways also, Theodora, this is not dissimilar from what Helen was asking, in that, the to be able to stay open and and grounded in yourself, and bringing this open space with you, and be completely open to the reality of what's happening in the group. So the reality that's happening in the group is someone is saying no. And that's interesting. That's something to be curious about. That's the reality of what's happening right then. And not to say, oh dang, this could have been a wonderful group, but this guy just said no, so everything that I'd wanted to have happen is now just not happened, and it's not possible. But to stay with what is actually present, and then, wow, what's the potential from this? It's hard, because you feel like, everything that I wanted to have happen just blew up. But that is the reality from which the emergence will have to happen. It's not going to be imported from some other star. It will only be emergent from the actual situation. And your ability to stay open in that space is essential. But that's hard work. It's practice.
And to connect it to what we talked before the break about language, and languaging, because if I may say so, the magic tools that you have to do this are, on one hand, your awareness for the space and your groundedness, and on the other hand, your capacity to speak to it, to evoke it. And that's a skill, that, like any other skill, it takes time for mastery. Mm-hmm. And one can be also humble. One doesn't learn to play the piano in one day. Mm-hmm. But one can learn, and after the first week of playing piano, it is something. But also to have the heart to let it take time to master something like this, because it needs this awareness, it needs this inner practice, it needs this connectedness, and it needs the capacity to be able to speak to it. It means to place language in a way that evokes what wants to be evoked. And that's something that can be learned or cultivated, to be more precise. It can be cultivated. It's cultivated through listening, awareness, and a lot by doing the wrong thing and learning this didn't work.
Unfortunately, that's the learning process.
It's kind of learning by doing, no? And
yeah,
it's very much kind of learning by doing.
And being thrown in the water in the deep end, you know.
So thanks for this question. Thanks for bringing this up, because we are all in that very same situation.
Thank you so much for holding the space for us and together, and for your answer.
Okay, Judith will take this one last question, and then we'd like to do some small group work. So, yeah, Judith, unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Hi.
Yes, you can.
Good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here, sort of immersed in all these teachings. It's really wonderful, and it's so lovely to hear you. And you know, you're talking about language and communication, and it's so important. The voice. I haven't heard you use the word "the voice."
Good point.
And you're doing it so unconsciously that you're not even aware how beautifully you're using your voices. And you know, in terms of creating a space and skill, one can do so much with one's voice: the frequency, the pace, you know, you fall into a space when somebody speaks slowly with pauses, and you can feel it connected rather than with a gabble. And it's so lovely that's how I feel you're creating a coherence. I mean, it almost makes me want to cry, that it's I feel that it's like you're talking, you're pacing, you're giving each other space, you're taking your space. There's a pitch that immediately allows us to fall into slowing down. And you know yourselves that when somebody speaks and it's connected, you can feel if it's real and if it's coming from the heart, than if it's, you know, just this gabbling and this, you know, when you were saying about people are just talking about themselves. It's not that deep connection. And you're modeling that, and it's like a fish in water. Of course, you know you're doing it, but it's so much second nature that I just felt it was worth reflecting back that in this space of two-dimensionality, in a way of all the senses, we can see, we can hear, and we can listen, but we are also using sound and voice. And yeah, I just wanted to mention that as an observation, and that all that you're speaking about to me is deep spiritual practice. It's bringing together so much of a well that you've obviously accumulated, that you're just bringing it forward. And for me, it's very nourishing. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think this is what we mean by language is invocation. You know, it changes if you are doing whatever you can do to align with that and allow your speech to come from that,
Mm-hmm.
and not knowing whether it does or not, because it doesn't live in, oh yeah, I know I'm doing this. It lives in not knowing and not being sure, but giving anyway. And that's where all of us are in the same boat with this, that it's easy with things that one has done for a long time to say, oh, I know this, we can just do it, we can just do this, and in that separate from the thing that you love most and the thing that you're trying to communicate most. But I think because it's so uncertain and so and requires it comes from us, but it needs to resonate in you, that it keeps one at an edge in a good way.
Thank you.
And there's also something else that you are pointing out, and I'm grateful you're doing it because it hasn't been said yet, and it is important. And it's a very simple point. Language is music. And music talks.
Yeah.
Communicates.
Music communicates. So, to be very precise, I think one place where one can learn a lot about dialogue, at least I think so, I experience it this way, are the late string quartets of Beethoven.
Mm-hmm.
When you listen, and of course good jazz music even more so, because that's it, it's created out of emergent presence in a good jazz session. But a string quartet, the way the different voices talk to each other, it communicates deeply. And I don't mean it as a metaphor. Language, any kind of dialogue is music. We don't only communicate the meaning of the words, exactly what you're saying, the pitch, the voice, the breaks. This is part of the communication. It's not just the particular rational argument I want to bring across or something like that. It's all fine. It's all part of language too. But language is literally, it's not a metaphor. Language is a form of music. And when we talk with each other, we intonate music with each other. When we have no break, it becomes breathless.
Yeah.
Yes.
When we don't allow to come a conversation to come to an end point, and then we don't understand the dramaturgy of a dialogue that has beginning, a middle, and an end. And you have to respect that you talk different in the beginning, in the middle, and the end. And there's a rhythm. And you find when you're sensitive, at least I hope so, you're aware when you're talking too much. Or you're aware when your voice is needed. Or you're aware when there's too much tension in the room, also when it's too flat. And I'm grateful you're bringing this in, because it is one aspect of dialogue that is not so much talked about.
Yeah, and it's funny that we don't talk about it because it's what we're talking with.
Right, exactly.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, I think that's a really great introduction to our small group exercise. So we're going to break into groups again of, I guess, 4 or 5. Let's see. Yeah, 4 participants per room. And what we would like you to do is to speak together about listening. To talk about listening. What is good listening? What is deep listening? What is what is listening? And I think yeah, we'll engage for about 20 minutes.
Because again, listening is an underestimated half of what communication is about. And the art of listening is the art of being aware of what is opening up between us, also being aware of the other and his or her otherness that's talking to me, to be aware of the dissonance, to be aware of the harmony, to talk in musical language.
I would say bring your musical ears to this.
It's also being aware of the creative impulse that's opening up, because usually when a different perspective meets you, a perspective that you haven't held, and it meets your perspectives, that there's something happening between these two perspectives that either can slip into conflict, or it can be a creative evocation of something that unknown that both of you or whatever the amount of people haven't been aware of, but because it comes together, this friction allows something creative to open up. But the place where this opens up is the place of listening. And there's one thing I want to bring in before we go into this group is one question: how deep do I want to listen? And to kind of make the point of what I'm speaking to is, if what you tell me will really shatter everything I believe in, everything I trust in, if basically what you, if I would hear you, it will really rip my world apart. Would I want to hear you in this moment? Or would I prefer not to hear you to hold my world intact? I'm not saying that one or the other is better. Maybe sometimes it's good to hold your world intact, but just to see that we all have points where we prefer not to hear in order to protect our world. The deep listening is a courageous act. It's a courageous act because really deep listening means that what you say maybe really questions everything I'm holding, and I'm willing to hear you. And just to see that listening is not just something harmless. It's a deep, trustful act that we have to engage in.
And I know, Annika, you have your hand up, and so does Judith. Do you need to speak before we go into groups? Is it about that, or can we hold?
No, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry.
Okay. All right.
It's okay for me too. That was just a try.
Okay, no problem.
Then how long do we want?
20 minutes.
20 minutes, and we open the groups, and yeah, please enjoy.
Okay. Let's see, is everyone back? Maybe not quite. All right. So, what is listening? Let's have a conversation here together on what is listening. What did you explore in your groups? Where did you go? What does this mean about listening? Yeah, Gabriela.
Thank you. I just wish to apologise to my group, but also it's a learning as both a participant and a facilitator for all of us. My laptop power, the plug pulled out, so my computer completely shut down. When I got back into Zoom, it's just been explained to me, just for your participants in the future, that if you completely cut out, you can't automatically go back into the group. But if it had just been a small glitch, I would have automatically gone back in. interestingly enough, the question that I had just talked about that was raised by Thomas, he said, would you really be prepared to listen so deeply that whatever the person would say would challenge and rock your world? And I had a reaction to that right now would be, no, absolutely not. Isn't there enough rocking the world? I've had enough, too fragile, etc. And I had just had someone's response to that, and the computer collapsed. So it sort of manifested that the computer was with me, and probably I didn't want to listen. But no, I did. I'm just sorry that I wasn't able to explain to my group why I cut out, and I was listening to the tree outside moving in the wind while I waited. Thank you.
Sounds like a good thing to do.
Mm.
Our trees are moving here too in the wind.
Mm. Yeah. Jen? Jen, go ahead.
Hi. So we played a little game at the beginning, and because we agreed that if there's 20 minutes and anyone spoke more than 5 minutes, they weren't doing enough listening. Well, I said that. So we kind of played, we took 1 minute turns each to speak, and the rest of us listened. And we kind of did that for, I don't know, we did it for about 8 minutes, I think, which was really nice. And then we broke away from that, and we just took turns listening. And we certainly felt the thing you said about perhaps bringing enough of yourself to have the space, but too much started to crowd things out, and we kind of felt our way through it as we talked. We kind of did something, and then we kind of pulled back for a minute, and then perhaps we talked too much, and then we were quiet for a bit. So we were really kind of sometimes quite uncomfortably negotiating that kind of thing. So it was almost not as if we came to any great conclusions. We just explored that play of listening and not speaking enough, and then not thinking about yourself too much and being open to the space. So it was really interesting.
Super.
What I really like most what you said is that you're feeling your way through it, because it is an ongoing intuitive negotiation where you have to be with the space, and you can't do it with your mental capacity so much. They can support it, but they are not the first place there. It's an intuitive goal. You have to sense it out, and it going uncomfortable is just basically sensing where the boundaries are, and an ongoing learning. So I really appreciate that, because to my understanding, that's the way how you do it.
I think also, particularly as we're learning and developing competence here in this, that the exploration is not an intellectual one. It's not an idea. It's about, and this is also a training in being able to transmit what it is that this consciousness, what if we explore the experience itself, and the nuances of the experience, and when does it all of a sudden pop up and feel like it's too intellectual? When does it feel like it's invasively personal in a certain way that doesn't feel helpful? When is something alive between us? Exploring that for real, in real time, is the work that develops the foundation for learning, and it allows one to stay in a zone of creative, what we call creative friction. The heat between two sticks, between each of us that creates a fire. That and how different that is from fragmenting. And when you start to explore, it's like, oh, whoops, that just went, very intellectual and very disconnected. Well, that's interesting. And then bring that into these observations in together to develop the shared perception of the space. That's it's important work in developing one's skill set.
Yeah. So it was just as you say, it was almost like we were learning to dance, and oops, I stood on your toes there, or I pushed you, or I haven't joined in that. It was like we were kind of and it wasn't all easy. It was kind of negotiating, and
great,
like a dance.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jen.
Yes,
Ananda.
May I?
Sure, Mario.
That was nice. Now that the dance was coming up, I somehow had this impression of talking about listening is probably similar like dancing about the painting.
Yeah.
And or painting a dance, while where maybe it might make sense if I paint a dance that I'm also dancing while painting, right? Same as talking and listening.
Yeah. No, talking about listening without listening, and not without bringing listening to speech is doesn't work, does it? Yeah. Then let's. Ananda has her hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes. You said about creative friction, and right now I'm sort of caught between polarities, polarities of, and what came up in our group for listening from a spacious, open, relaxed, big space, and of a focused, conscious awareness. I'm listening to you, I'm picking up everything, and also I'm being conscious of how my actions are affecting the group, and a really focused one, and polarities between the responsibility and the irresponsibility there. And I'm really wanting to integrate those, and I'm not sure how to do that, how to bring them together. And also this kind of like, how is intellectual dialogue possible, kind of thing.
I think first of all, I think there's an interpersonal space, and there's a space that we call intersubjective, even though interpersonal is a type of between subject space. And I'd like to make that distinction, that when we really focus on an other person, it's very easy to lose the group, the whole. And the point of listening in a space like this is not to dive into the interpersonal, because diving into the interpersonal loses the totality of the whole that you're in. And so there is from this wide, spacious place that you were speaking about, an ability to attend to and be aware of and in resonance with, or explore what happens to the center, to the intersubjective as someone is speaking. But it's in that way, it's not a polarity. But the custom that we have in human relationship up to this point is to dive in and be with one. And in a collective, in developing this collective awareness in this dialogical space, it calls us to hold the whole thing open and be aware of the contributions that come into the whole.
And to speak to this from the other side, holding the whole enables us in a very particular way to hold the creative friction. Because the creative friction, in fact, is the sweet spot of the whole communication. That's quite often the most interesting spot, because at this spot, and that's very much related to listening, there is the potential of conflict on one hand, basically, I'm right, you're wrong, this kind of thing. And there's the potential of close down. Basically, I shut down communication. I'm not interested what you're saying. And both is kind of an end of the dialogical space. And the capacity, and it's quite a skill to hold, and even more a skill to facilitate, is to keep this sweet spot open so that it doesn't fall into breakdown of the end of the conversation. I'm not interested in what you're saying, and it doesn't switch into the conflict that I'm right, you're wrong, but there's something opening up that is beyond the polarity in this. And our intention of the whole dialogical space and our care for this whole dialogical space is part of what anchors us in a bigger reality that allows to hold this contradiction in a way that something can show up that does not necessarily feel good. It feels, I don't know, I still what you're saying doesn't make sense to me, or it's stupid or whatever. But there's a willingness to lean into that because you are aware of a bigger dialogical space, and you're being anchored in this bigger dialogical space allows you this tension point to become creative. And it's also the sweet spot because quite often it's exactly at that point where the creative breakthrough happens. Mm-hmm. Where something new emerges that I was completely incapable of seeing. You were completely capable of seeing. It's, by the way, particularly true in intellectual conversation, because in intellectual conversation, that I'm right, you're wrong, immediately happens, at least to me. To learn that for oneself, and even also to facilitate for a group, is really something that takes a lot of care and experience, awareness, holding.
I wanted to point to this how important it is to hold this wholeness as a facilitator and as a participant, because it's within the wholeness that the polarity happens. The polarity is never the total. The polarity is always happening in a whole, and it will only be resolved in a wholeness. And it's not resolved by one giving into the other, but by the kind of creative friction that creates something new out of the dynamic. But that only becomes a space that is a space of possibility and transformation when the wholeness is held. So and this is actually quite a, you want to say, advanced, complex way of engaging, because it's creating an open space in consciousness and in oneself in which in which all of this is happening. And so it's a really multidimensional and complex awareness that one needs to bring. And it's kind of at the edge of what most is possible for most of us. You know, it's not, this is something, a capacity that we all need to develop more. And then there's a space for transformation in it. Stephanie, hi.
You have to unmute.
I'm yes,
now we can hear you.
Thank you for unmuting me. That's a challenge I perceive, to take in what I perceive, what I hear, what I sense, and to really sense it in my body, to sense the fear, the anger, the joy, whatever is rising up and shows up. And at the same time to stay open, to be soft, and to let go it again, and maybe to wait for the impulse which is coming from the whole body, not only from my thinking, but what is more with my whole heart or the whole body, or what I feel is right at the moment. And to realize that very often I'm overwhelmed or dissociated because there's so much going on, because the vessel, the gefäß, the vessel is not big enough. So it reminds me a lot of the teaching what you give to us from my dancing teachers, They invited us to pause in that moment so that I'm able to settle again and to create or to let go the space again, and then to go further on. That was a reflection what we were talking about in our small group, and what
Great.
Well, that's great. There's one other element I would like to bring in, and definitely what the dancing teacher brings here, the pause, I think it's very helpful. There's something, our capacity to sense the whole, to be aware of the whole, allows us to hold more tension.
Yeah.
It's kind of a reverse. It's not only it's good to care about the whole, you ought to be there, but to the capacity that we are aware of it and develop a care, love for this, it helps us with our personal limitations to some degree. I mean, there's a limit to all of it, and we also have to respect our limits. There's only so much we can take, but there's something when you're aware of, oh, wait a moment, this brings the space to the point of fragmentation. Maybe I have to slow down or something, just because you're aware that this would bring the shared dialogical space to the point of fragmentation, and you care about this space. That also gives you the motivation to do something. Otherwise, I really feel so strongly about this that you just hold it. Not because you must or should, but because out of care. It's not a moral, you shouldn't do that. It's just, no, I care for this. So this is more important for me. And there's something that I find very helpful, that the capacity to sense the wholeness allows also to hold more tension that otherwise I would not be able to hold.
Part of it is because there's love there. Yeah. Thank you.
It's also the pain.
And
the joy, both. It's the same.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you too.
So we're at the end of time, and we have one hand raised. Josie, can we respond to your question or comment? Is that do you want to?
Yeah, it's just very much relating to what Stephanie said, and Thomas, you said now about the care. That was one thing that came up in our group that I still wanted to share. That I had the image of listen. If you want to listen, you have to create a room for the other one within yourself in a way. And then this point came up that sometimes you're not able to create this room within yourself, and also allow yourself to sometimes not listen to someone if you don't have the room for it. And caring also for yourself in this, in a way, for then caring for the other one to really be there and to be open. Just very short.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Makes sense to me.
And okay, I think we're at the end of our session today, and actually I wanted to bring this in. Thomas wasn't sure if we should, but tonight on Thomas every week does something called Radio Evolve, and tonight on Radio Evolve, and every week alternating between German and English, there are open dialogues. So if you want to practice, it's at 6 p.m. UTC, which is 8 p.m. in Central Europe, in Germany, and 2 in the afternoon on the East Coast of the United States.
With a very, very interesting man, Jordan Hall, talking about the crisis of sense making, and it's a very interesting conversation that I already recorded with him, and afterwards we will have an open forum. So if you don't have enough screen time today, you say I want more, there's an opportunity to be more on screen today.
Well, but it's also an opportunity. It's also an opportunity to be to experiment with dialogue and to be in an open dialogue with other human beings who are not taking this program, but yeah, could be an interesting practice experience. But if you want to find out about it, it's on Facebook. You could go to Radio Evolve and you'll find it.
And one other thing, I hope you don't mind mentioning it. This is a free course. We are very happy to give you the free course. And we are also very happy if you feel inclined and motivated to support our work with a donation. It helps us to do what we try to do here. Thank you so much.
And the breakout groups.
And now I will end the big room. I will put you back in the breakout groups. You have just been in before. Again, if you don't have time, just you can leave now. If you want to hang out a little bit, hang out a little bit. If you want to hang out longer, and we see each other tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Danke.
Thank you.
Danke sehr.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Yeah.